Can a luxury car weighing more than 2 tons accelerate like a true muscle car? In the 1960s, some American brands discovered that comfort, leather, and silence did not have to be separated from speed. In this list, we will discover 10 of the fastest American luxury cars of the decade. Some were created to travel fast, others became fast almost by accident, but all of them proved that, in the 1960s, American luxury could also leave tire marks on the pavement. Leave a like, subscribe, and discover which of these enormous machines was the most surprising. 1968 Buick Riviera Gran Sport. It did not look like it was in a hurry. That was precisely its trick. At more than 17.9 feet long, with wood on the dashboard, wide seats, and headlights hidden behind a grille that occupied the entire front end, the Riviera could be mistaken for a private living room on wheels. But when the accelerator was pressed, its more than 4,190 pounds were pushed by a 430 cubic inch V8 producing 360 horsepower and a brutal 475 pound-feet of torque. The power arrived through a 3-speed super-turbine automatic transmission. In period tests, the Riviera could reach 60 miles per hour in approximately 8.1 seconds, cover the quarter mile in around 15.9 seconds, and comfortably exceed 120 miles per hour. These were not the figures of a lightweight sports car, but of one of Buick's largest, most expensive, and most refined automobiles. And here's the curiosity. In 1968, the Gran Sport badge did not add more power. Every Riviera used the same 360 horsepower V8. The true secret of the GS was beneath the car. A more aggressive 3.42 final drive ratio, a limited slip differential, and firmer tuning. Instead of creating more power, Buick made sure that all that force reached the pavement with greater determination. Only 5,337 units received that package out of the 49,284 Rivieras built that year. That meant the GS was less a disguised muscle car and more a grand tourer for someone who wanted silence, air conditioning, and elegance, but refused to watch the taillights of the car beside them disappear into the distance. The Riviera Gran Sport proved that speed did not always require stripes, air scoops, or aggressive bodywork. Sometimes it arrived with thick carpeting, walnut details, and a threat perfectly hidden behind chrome. 1960 Chrysler 300F. In February 1960, on the wet sand of Daytona Beach, an enormous Chrysler crossed the flying mile at an average speed of 144.927 miles per hour, almost 145 miles per hour. It was not a prototype with a lightweight body. It retained its leather seats, enormous fins, and the size of an automobile prepared to carry 4 adults comfortably. It was the wildest side of the Chrysler 300F. The standard version already used a 413 cubic inch V8, producing 375 horsepower and 495 pound-feet of torque. But the extraordinary feature was above the engine. 2 4-barrel carburetors installed at opposite ends, connected by enormous intake runners that crossed over the top of the block. Chrysler discovered that those tubes could use air pressure waves to fill the cylinders more effectively and produce a brutal response at low and medium engine speeds. The result was a large coupe weighing more than 2 tons that could reach 60 miles per hour in around 8 seconds. However, for Daytona, Chrysler prepared a small group of 300F specials with 400 horsepower, more aggressive camshafts, special exhaust systems, and modified intake runners designed to breathe more effectively at high engine speeds. One of those cars was tested by Motor Life. It accelerated from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 7.2 seconds. The power passed through an extremely rare French Pontiac 4-speed manual transmission, the same one used by the exclusive Fackel Vega. It was an almost absurd combination, racing engineering hidden inside one of the most luxurious American automobiles of 1960. Most customers received an automatic transmission operated by buttons on the dashboard. Only a handful had access to the manual version, and just 1,212 examples of the 300F were built, including coupes and convertibles. It was not simply fast for its size. For a few seconds on the sand of Daytona, it was the fastest American production automobile in its class. 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix SJ 428HO. To understand this automobile, the first thing to look at is its hood. John DeLorean wanted it to be the longest in the industry, an enormous stretch of metal that made the driver appear to be sitting almost over the rear axle. Behind it, the cabin abandoned the traditional layout. Instruments, switches, and controls surrounded the driver like the cockpit of an airplane. Pontiac was not trying to build another GTO. It was looking for something more ambitious, a muscle car that could enter the parking lot of a private club without losing its elegance. The SJ version already included a 370 horsepower, 428 V8, front disc brakes, a reinforced rear axle, and self-leveling suspension. But for just an additional $119, the 428 high output could be installed. Higher compression, a more aggressive camshaft, high-flow exhaust manifolds, and 390 horsepower. With a 4-speed manual transmission and a 3.90 rear axle ratio, this enormous coupe could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 6.8 seconds and complete the quarter mile in around 14.5. It was enough to chase a GTO, even though its driver traveled surrounded by padded seats, wood, power steering, and white wall tires. Its rarity was also extreme. Pontiac produced 112,486 Grand Prix models in 1969, but only 1,105 received the 428 HO engine. Of those, 986 used the Turbo 400 automatic, leaving just 119 HO. Examples with some form of manual transmission. Even the names told a story. DeLorean called the base model J and the superior version SJ as a tribute to the legendary Duesenbergs, American symbols of luxury and speed before the war. Now, tell me, would you choose this Grand Prix to compete against a GTO, or would you prefer the lighter muscle car? Leave your choice in the comments. 1968, Cadillac Eldorado. Imagine stopping at a traffic light behind the wheel of an 18.4-foot Cadillac, weighing more than 2 tons, with power seats and a cabin isolated from the outside world. A much smaller automobile appears beside you. The light changes, and the Cadillac is the first to disappear. In 1968, the Eldorado received a new 472 cubic inch V8, equivalent to 7.7 liters. It produced 375 horsepower, but the truly important figure was its 525 pound-feet of torque, available at only 3,000 revolutions per minute. The acceleration did not arrive like a nervous explosion, but like an enormous wave pushing the entire automobile forward. It could reach 60 miles per hour in approximately 8.6 seconds and complete the quarter mile in around 16.8. On paper, some muscle cars were faster, but few could repeat those figures while carrying 4 passengers surrounded by leather, wood, automatic climate control, and the silence expected from a Cadillac. The true madness was beneath the hood. The gigantic V8 remained mounted longitudinally, but the automatic transmission was positioned beside it. To connect both components, General Motors used a wide, silent metal chain that sent the power to the front wheels. Yes, 525 pound-feet traveled through a chain before attempting to move a front-wheel drive luxury automobile. When the driver accelerated too violently, the front tires could struggle for grip while the long hood lifted slightly. However, once in motion, the Eldorado seemed built to devour highways without effort. Cadillac produced 24,528 units that year. It was not a racing edition or an experimental rarity. It was a production automobile that combined revolutionary architecture, monumental dimensions, and enough power to embarrass much lighter machines. 1968, Ford LTD. The automobile assigned to chase it could be a Mustang, a Torino, or even a police car. But the same engine could also be ordered inside a Ford LTD with a vinyl roof, wood trim, and seats so soft that they seemed to belong in a living room. That was Ford's strange catalog in 1968. The customer chose luxury and power separately, until creating combinations that seem impossible today. The LTD could be equipped with the 7-liter 428 Thunderbird V8, fed by a 4-barrel carburetor. It produced 340 horsepower, and, much more importantly for moving such a large body, 462 pound-feet of torque at only 2,800 revolutions per minute. It was not the explosive 428 Cobra Jet, but it had enough strength to push nearly 2 tons with unsettling ease. In a Motor Trend test, an automatic LTD accelerated from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 9.3 seconds and covered the quarter mile in 16.8. That may seem moderate compared with a muscle car, but that example carried an extremely tall 2.80 final drive ratio, selected to provide silence, lower fuel consumption, and highway speeds with the engine barely breathing. However, Ford allowed something far more absurd, combining the 428 with a 4-speed top-loader manual transmission, dual exhaust, a traction-lock differential, and much shorter rear axle ratios. In other words, it was possible to walk into a dealership and order an enormous LTD with a formal roof and practically the same transmission used in some of Ford's most aggressive automobiles of the era. One of those cars even left the factory equipped with air conditioning, power windows, an 8-track player, heavy-duty suspension, and a 4.11 differential. It was executive luxury configured as though it were about to enter a drag race. 1968 Chrysler New Yorker. The passenger could recline the seat until it formed a genuine chaise longue. The driver, meanwhile, had beneath the right foot an engine used in some of Chrysler's most feared muscle cars. That was how contradictory the 1968 New Yorker was. Before the fuselage design transformed the range in 1969, this model retained a straighter and more formal body, with 4 headlights, enormous chrome surfaces, and a length of nearly 18.3 feet. It was the Chrysler for someone who wanted to travel surrounded by thick carpeting, elaborate upholstery, and silence carefully created through a unitized body with thousands of welds. But its standard engine was hardly discreet. A 440 cubic inch, 7.2-liter V8 with a 4-barrel carburetor, 350 horsepower, and 480 pound-feet of torque connected to the durable 3-speed torque-flight automatic transmission. The power arrived early and without drama. The car simply lifted its front end and began to push as though its enormous mass had disappeared. Anyone who wanted to take the contradiction even further could order the 440 TNT. With a high-performance camshaft, dual exhaust, and a dual snorkel air cleaner, it produced 375 horsepower. Modern estimates place the 2-door hardtop at around 6.8 seconds from 0 to 60 miles per hour and approximately 15.2 seconds in the quarter mile. Extraordinary figures for an automobile built to carry 6 people comfortably. The most absurd curiosity was inside. Would you travel relaxed in the reclining seat? Or would you rather be behind the wheel of the 440 TNT? Leave your answer in the comments. 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado. In 1966, Oldsmobile made a decision that seemed mechanically absurd, sending 475 pound-feet of torque to the front wheels of a coupe weighing more than 2 tons. The Toronado was the first American production automobile with front-wheel drive since the 1937 Cord. Its 425 cubic inch rocket V8 produced 385 horsepower. But the true spectacle was in the transmission. The engine remained mounted longitudinally, and a metal chain transferred the power to an automatic transmission installed beside it. Before approving the system, Oldsmobile accumulated more than 1 million miles of testing. Under hard acceleration, the front tires could protest, and the immense hood seemed to rise toward the sky. Even so, a Motor Trend test recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour in 9.5 seconds, and the quarter mile in 17.2. Other measurements placed its top speed near 130 miles per hour, a serious figure for a luxury automobile weighing almost 4,500 pounds. But its talent was not limited to acceleration. During a 2,769-mile test between Michigan and California, the journalists crossed Nevada at 90 miles per hour with the windows closed. When they finally lowered them upon arriving in Las Vegas, the urban traffic seemed deafening. That anecdote summarizes the Toronado better than any number. It could cross the country at enormous speeds without turning the journey into a punishment. Even its speedometer was strange. Instead of a conventional needle, it used a vertical rotating drum, as though speed were a figure the machine revealed little by little. 1969 Mercury Marauder X100. Mercury did not try to hide its size. It made it part of the spectacle. The Marauder X100 measured more than 18 feet long, used a 121-inch wheelbase, and weighed close to 4,300 pounds. Its roof descended between enormous rear pillars, forming a design Mercury called the tunnel roof. From the base of the rear window to the end of the trunk, an extensive section could be painted matte black, as though that gigantic coupe wore a racing stripe almost 6.5 feet long. The appearance was not an empty promise. Every X100 left the factory with a 7-liter 429 V8, a 4-barrel carburetor, dual exhaust, 360 horsepower, and 480 pound-feet of torque. There was no smaller version merely for appearance. Buying the X100 badge meant receiving the large engine as standard. In a car life test, it accelerated from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 7.8 seconds and covered the quarter mile in 15.13, crossing the line at 92.3 miles per hour. It was practically as fast as some muscle cars, despite carrying an automatic transmission, power steering, front disc brakes, and enough room for 6 passengers. Its standard 2.80 final drive ratio was not designed for a violent launch. It was intended to let the 429 breathe slowly, while the Marauder accumulated speed on the highway. That was where it found its true territory. Long overtaking maneuvers, enormous straightaways, and the horizon disappearing behind the hood. Mercury even offered individual seats, a center console, and leather upholstery, although a 4-speed manual transmission was never available. This was not an automobile for a young driver willing to wrestle with the gear lever at every traffic light. It was for someone who wanted speed without giving up traveling like an executive. Only 5,635 units were produced in 1969. The Marauder X100 lasted only 2 years, but left behind an image difficult to repeat. A muscle car stretched until it reached the dimensions of a yacht. 1966 Chevrolet Caprice. At the dealership, the Caprice appeared as Chevrolet's answer to higher-priced automobiles. It had deeply padded seats, simulated walnut details, a formal roof, and a suspension tuned for smooth travel. However, a few pages later in the catalog, the buyer found an option capable of ruining all that tranquility. Turbojet 427. The 7-liter V8 produced 390 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque. It could be combined with the turbo-hydromatic automatic, but also with a fully synchronized 4-speed manual transmission. This created an almost surreal configuration. A large luxury Chevrolet, with room for 5 or 6 people. A clutch, a floor-mounted shifter, and the same displacement as a Corvette. In the custom coupe, the complete package weighed around 4,035 pounds. There is no definitive period test for every combination, but simulations based on its gear ratios and specifications estimate around 6 seconds from 0 to 60 miles per hour, and approximately 14.6 seconds in the quarter mile for a well-configured manual 427. That was genuine muscle car territory. Curiously, Chevrolet set a limit. The brutal 425 horsepower 427 could be installed in other large models from the brand, but the catalog itself stated that it was not available in the Caprice. Even Detroit seemed to believe that 390 horsepower was already enough for an automobile with elegant moldings and interior lights in all 4 doors. Even so, a positive traction differential, heavy-duty suspension, individual strato seats, a console, and a tachometer could be added. Seen from the outside, it still looked like a lawyer's car on the way to the office. From the driver's seat, every gear change could turn it into one of the most unsettling sleepers of 1966. 1966 Ford Thunderbird. In 1966, Ford presented driving a Thunderbird almost like piloting an airplane. The driver had speed controls on the steering wheel, an overhead panel with fuel, door, and seatbelt warnings, as well as a cartridge stereo capable of filling the cabin with music for more than an hour. But that road-going airplane had just received a much more serious engine. For the first time, the Thunderbird could be equipped with the 7-liter 428 V8. It produced 345 horsepower and 462 pound-feet of torque at only 2,800 revolutions per minute, compared with the 315 horsepower of the standard 390. Paired with the 3-speed Cruise-O-Matic automatic, it did not turn it into a nervous muscle car. It transformed it into an enormous reserve of power that was always available. At nearly 17.1 feet long and weighing around 2 tons, a well-tuned 428 could reach 60 miles per hour in around 9 seconds and approach 120 miles per hour. The acceleration seemed even stranger from its shell contour seats, while the swing-away steering wheel made entry easier, and the sequential taillights traveled across the entire width of the automobile when signaling a turn. The most sophisticated curiosity was the highway pilot. The driver set the speed using a bar integrated into the steering wheel. Another control canceled the system, applied slight deceleration, and then automatically returned at the selected pace. It was a primitive but surprisingly theatrical way of controlling speed on a highway in 1966. The Thunderbird had been born as a 2-seat sports car. A decade later, it was larger, quieter, and more luxurious. However, the 428 ensured that beneath all that futuristic technology, there was still enough violence to lift the long hood and make it disappear down the road. These automobiles proved that, in the 1960s, American luxury was not condemned to travel slowly. With enormous V8 engines, bodies weighing more than 2 tons, and unexpected technical solutions, each one found a different way to combine comfort, elegance, and speed. Now, I want to know your opinion. Which of these cars would you choose to cross an American highway, and which one do you think was the most impressive on the list? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you want to discover machines that were even larger, more extravagant, and more luxurious, watch our video about the most elegant American land yachts of the 1960s. See you there.